The winter moon hung above the palace like a blade of pale fire. Its light spilled through the tall windows of the grand ballroom and turned the black marble floor into a frozen mirror. Silver chandeliers burned overhead. Moonflowers trembled in crystal bowls along the walls. Every wolf in the room stood dressed in silk, velvet, and polished power, pretending this was a sacred ceremony and not a battlefield waiting for blood. She stood near the edge of the hall in a servant's gray dress that was too thin for the cold. Too thin for the hunger, too. Her hands were folded in front of her because they had taught her to stand still, to look down, to make herself smaller than the air around her. But even then, she could feel the attention in the room shifting toward her like iron drawn to a magnet. She hated that feeling. She hated the way the nobility looked at servants as if they were furniture that had learned to breathe. At the center of the hall, beneath the hanging moonstone crest of the crown, the High Elder lifted both hands. "By the blessing of the winter moon," he said, his voice carrying cleanly through the chamber, "we gather to witness the sacred rites of strength, blood, and bond." A low murmur moved through the crowd. She kept her face blank. The ceremony was supposed to be simple, public, political, a display of order for the 7 packs, a reminder that the Alpha King still ruled all, even with the council watching him like vultures circling a dying thing. She had been told to stand at the edge and wait until the servants were dismissed. She had not been told why her stomach had gone hollow with fear the moment she entered the ballroom. She knew better than to trust fear. Fear was a warning. Hunger was a warning. Hope was the dangerous one. The music changed. The crowd parted, and then another alpha stepped into the center of the room. He was broad-shouldered, richly dressed, and arrogant in the way only powerful wolves could be. Gold thread crossed his black coat. His jaw was clean-shaven. His eyes swept the room with the lazy confidence of a man who believed witnesses made him righteous. Her throat tightened. He stopped in front of her. The room went still. "You," he said. No title, no courtesy, just the word. She lifted her chin a fraction. "If you're speaking to me, you should learn my name first." A few wolves nearby shifted at that. A few hidden smiles appeared and vanished just as quickly. The alpha's mouth twitched, not in amusement, but irritation. He clearly did not like being answered by someone he considered beneath him. "Names are for bonds," he said. "Tonight, I make one." Every muscle in her body went rigid. He reached for her wrist. She stepped back at once. "Don't touch me." His hand stopped in the air for the space of one breath, then his smile sharpened. "Feisty," he said, loud enough for the nearest circle to hear. "That will make the claiming sweeter." The word struck the room like a hammer. Claiming. The whisper spread instantly through the ballroom. Her stomach turned cold. She knew what a public claim meant. She knew what it meant to be taken into a pack with witnesses watching, to be fixed into someone's power by ritual and expectation and political convenience. It was not love. It was not choice. It was a declaration that the court would later pretend had always been destiny. "No," she said. The alpha's gaze lowered to her mouth, then back to her eyes. "You don't get to refuse what the moon has already marked for you." "I said no." That one word landed harder than the first. The room tightened around them. She could feel it now. The shift. The appetite. A public spectacle was always a feast for wolves, especially when a woman had no rank, no allies, and no visible protector. They loved the illusion of a clean outcome. They loved to watch power dress itself up as fate, The Alpha reached for her again. This time, she twisted out of the way, fast enough to make the nearest servants gasp. Her shoulder brushed the edge of a passing tray. Crystal rang softly. Someone at the back laughed under their breath. His eyes narrowed. "Careful," he said. "You are making this difficult." "I wasn't aware I was supposed to make it easy." That got a larger reaction. Not from sympathy, from shock. She was a servant, a nobody. A girl in gray with a hollowed-out face and two sharp eyes. She had no right to speak like that in front of an Alpha. That alone would have earned punishment in another court. But this was winter ceremony night, and the moon was above them, and every wolf in the room was waiting to see which way power would fall. Before the Alpha could answer, the ballroom doors opened again. The sound was small. The effect was not. The entire room turned. He entered without haste. No announcement, no escort in front of him. No need. The Alpha King crossed the threshold in black leather and silver shadow, his presence cutting through the room so cleanly it felt like the air had been split open. He did not hurry. He did not need to. Every step was measured, precise, deliberate, as if the world itself had agreed to wait for him. Gold eyes, dark hair, a face carved from restraint and war. She had never seen him this close before. She had seen him from a distance at court. She had seen him seated on the moonstone throne, cold and unreadable. She had seen nobles bow under the weight of his voice. But this was different. Up close, he did not look like a king built for ceremony. He looked like a force that had learned to wear a man's shape. The Alpha in front of her stiffened. The king's gaze moved once across the room and stopped on the scene in front of him. On the Alpha's hand, half raised. On her standing rigid in gray. On the tension drawn tight enough to snap. Then his eyes met hers, and something in her chest jolted hard enough to hurt. Not recognition, not yet. Something deeper than that, something primitive, unwelcome, immediate. His nostrils flared once, very slightly, but she saw it. His pupils narrowed, then widened, the gold darkening around the edges. His jaw tightened. The hand at his side curled once before relaxing again. Only a fool would miss the effort it took for him to remain still. The silence stretched. The High Elder looked suddenly nervous. The rival Alpha recovered first. "Your Majesty," he said with false ease, "I was just claiming what the moon has clearly placed in my path." The king did not answer. He kept looking at her. Her skin prickled. The sensation was not fear, it was worse. It felt like being seen all the way through, stripped of the servant's dress and the bowed head and the practiced invisibility. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff while something enormous and invisible took measure of her soul. The Alpha King finally spoke. His voice was low. That was all it needed to be. "Step away from her." The rival Alpha gave a sharp laugh. "Or what?" The king's gaze did not move from the girl in gray. "Or I will make this ceremony a massacre." A collective inhale ran through the ballroom. Her pulse slammed against her ribs. The rival Alpha's face hardened. "You would challenge me over a servant?" At that, the king's eyes shifted, just once. The look he gave the other Alpha was flat enough to freeze blood. "You do not know what she is." The words landed in the center of the room and changed everything. She felt it before the crowd did, that strange pull in the air, that invisible thread tightening. Her mouth went dry. The rival Alpha drew himself up. "I know exactly what she is. She is a girl with no house and no claim." The king's head tilted a fraction. Then you are blind. No one moved. No one breathed. The rival Alpha's nostrils flared with offense, with pride, with the need to win in front of witnesses. I claimed her before you entered this hall. By right and moon law, she is mine. There it was, the moment the room had been waiting for. The king finally took one step forward. The sound of that boot against marble seemed to echo across the kingdom. No, he said, just one word. The rival Alpha's shoulders squared. No? No. The king's voice dropped lower, colder, more dangerous. You claimed a body you did not understand. You reached for a woman who is not yours, and now you will release her. A murmur rose through the crowd. She could feel eyes on her from every direction. Curious, hungry, confused. Some were already calculating what this meant for the Pax, for the council, for the balance of power. Some were already deciding how to turn her into a rumor before the night was over. She hated them all for looking at her like this. Like she was a prize. Like she was a problem. Like she was a spark between two armed men. The rival Alpha smiled in contempt. You are making this personal. The king's lips barely moved. You made it personal when you touched what was not yours. Her breath caught. The words were possessive, terrifyingly so. But the way he said them was not like a man boasting. It was like a law of nature being stated aloud, as if the room had simply failed to understand a truth that had been obvious to him the moment he looked at her. The rival Alpha laughed again, too loudly this time. You have no interest in servant blood, Majesty. Not unless you mean to humiliate me. Now the king's face changed. It was subtle, worse than anger, more controlled. He turned fully toward the other Alpha, and the temperature in the ballroom seemed to drop by 10 degrees. She is not servant blood. The words rang out with certainty. The rival Alpha blinked. What? The king did not answer him. He spoke to her instead. Come here. Her spine locked. Every instinct she had ever learned told her to stay where she was. Not because she trusted the Alpha behind her. She didn't. Not because she trusted the king. She didn't trust him either. Men like this did not usually arrive in a woman's life carrying mercy. They arrived carrying decisions. So she stayed still. The king watched her. A muscle flexed once in his jaw. Then, to the shock of the room, he lowered his voice. I will not touch you unless you ask me to. The words hit harder than the command had. The ballroom shifted again. That was not what anyone expected from an Alpha King. That was not what anyone expected from a man who could have taken her in front of the entire court and called it law. The rival Alpha looked furious now. You cannot simply... The king raised one hand. The room went silent at once. He did not shout. He did not need to. Enough. The word cracked across the hall like thunder. The rival Alpha shut his mouth. The king's eyes returned to her. Not impatient, not mocking, exact, focused, too focused. Come here, he said again, softer this time. Or stay where you are. The choice is yours. Her heart stumbled. That should not have mattered, but it did. Because no one had given her a choice in years. Not her dead parents. Not the people who had taken her in. Not the servants who ordered her about. Not the nobles who never noticed her unless they wanted to be cruel. Even the rival Alpha had made his claim, like she was a thing he could lift off a shelf. The king was different. Or he was better at pretending. She did not know which frightened her more. Slowly, because every eye in the ballroom was on her, she lifted her chin and stepped forward. One pace, then another. The rival Alpha's lips tightened. The king did not move. He let her come to him. When she reached the center of the hall, she could smell him. Snow and smoke, dark pine and iron, something older beneath it that she could not name and did not want to understand. She stopped a few feet away. He looked down at her with that same terrible stillness. Then he said, "What is your name?" The question was simple. It should have been harmless. Instead, it felt like a hand closing around a locked door inside her chest. She hesitated. Too long. The rival Alpha laughed under his breath. He does not know who you are either, it seems. The king ignored him. He only watched her. And then very quietly, he said, "Tell me your name." Something in his tone made it clear that this was not a command dressed as politeness. It was a request. Real, careful, dangerous in its own way. Her throat tightened. She had not been asked that in years. Not like it mattered. Not like the answer was meant for her. "I have one," she said. A few nearby wolves shifted at the sharpness in her voice. The king's gaze sharpened. "Then give it to me." She swallowed. And for the first time in a very long time, she answered without looking away. "Leora." The name hung between them. The king's nostrils flared again. This time, more visibly. His head lowered by the smallest fraction. Her breath caught without permission. The sensation in the air changed. The invisible thread she had not known existed snapped taut so fast it nearly stole the air from her lungs. His eyes widened, not with surprise, with recognition, and the world stopped. For one terrible, silent instant, every wolf in the ballroom felt it. The shift, the current, the impossible certainty that something ancient had just stirred awake between the Alpha King and the servant girl standing in gray. The rival Alpha's expression drained of color. "No," he said too quickly. "That is not possible." The king did not look away from Leora. His voice came out rougher than before. "Step back." She should have obeyed. Instead, she stared at him. Why? Because now she could feel it. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. A pulse under her skin that had nothing to do with fear. A heat rising through her palms. A strange, terrifying awareness that he was standing too close and too far at the same time. That something in her body had answered him before her mind could catch up. His jaw flexed. "Because if you do not," he said, every word controlled to the edge of breaking, "I will not be responsible for what my wolf does next." The rival Alpha went still. The court went still. And Leora realized with a sick, dizzy twist that the Alpha King had not declared war because of honor. He had declared it because he had recognized her. Not as property, not as a prize, as fate. And the man who had tried to claim her first had just made a very dangerous mistake. The king turned at last to the rival Alpha, and when he spoke again, his voice was cold enough to freeze the entire hall. "You will leave this ceremony now." The rival Alpha lifted his chin. "She is under my claim." The king's eyes flashed gold. "She was never under yours." A beat of silence. Then the king delivered the sentence that changed the room forever. "You have declared war on my crown by touching my mate!" The ballroom exploded into gasps. Leora's knees nearly gave way. "Mate!" The word seemed to strike every wolf in the chamber like lightning. Heads turned. Whispers broke. A few nobles actually stepped back. The rival Alpha looked as if he had been hit across the face. But Leora could not look away from the king, because he was still staring at her like she had become the only thing in the world worth destroying kingdoms for. And when he said the next words, they were not loud. They were worse than loud. They were final. Take one more step toward her, he said to the rival Alpha, and I will tear your pack apart before sunrise. Leora's mouth went dry. The war had already begun, and she had not even reached the door. The rival Alpha's face went from smug to stunned in a single breath. He had expected a scene. He had expected resistance. He had expected the court to treat the girl in gray as a movable inconvenience and the king as a distant threat. He had not expected the Alpha King to use the word mate in front of witnesses. That one word broke the illusion around the room. Every wolf in the ballroom now understood the danger. Not because the king had threatened war, because he had spoken like a man who had already decided he would win it. Leora could feel the room tightening around her. Eyes, whispers, the sound of silk shifting and boots moving and people pretending they were not afraid. She had no power here, no title, no defense. Yet somehow the entire hall now felt like it had tilted toward her and the king, as if the winter moon itself had decided to make her the center of the realm. She hated it. She hated how exposed she felt. And she hated the strange, impossible pull, drawing her toward him, even while every rational part of her screamed to step back. The rival Alpha recovered first. His jaw hardened. You cannot simply announce a bond and expect us to accept it. The king did not even glance at him. Instead, he kept his gaze on Leora. That was worse. That was far worse. Because he was looking at her like the rest of the room had ceased to exist, like she was the only question in the hall that mattered. Are you hurt? He asked. Leora blinked. It was such an unexpected question that for a moment she could only stare. Around them, the court seemed just as shocked. An Alpha King asking after a servant girl's well-being in the middle of a public claim should have been absurd. It should have been impossible. It should have sounded like weakness. Instead, it sounded like control. Why would I be? She asked. His gaze flicked once over her face, her posture, the visible strain in her body, the thinness of her wrists, the way she held herself too carefully. He saw too much. That was obvious. She did not like it. He said nothing for a moment. Then, very quietly, he answered, Because you are standing in a room full of wolves who think they can take what they want. Her breath caught. The words were too direct, too honest. They were not flattering, not soft, not a promise. Just the truth spoken by someone who clearly had no habit of hiding it. The rival Alpha cut back in, voice sharp with offense. I have done nothing unlawful. The king's eyes went cold. You made a claim without confirming the bond. It was a ceremonial claim. It was a lie dressed as ritual. The room murmured again. Leora looked between them, confused by the speed of what was happening and angry at herself for not understanding more. What bond? What lie? Why did the king sound as if he already knew the answer to a question no one else had asked aloud? The High Elder finally found his voice. Your Majesty, he said carefully, if there has been a recognition, it must be properly verified. The king's expression did not change. It has been. The elder hesitated. By scent? The king's gaze remained on Leora. By instinct. That answer sent a pulse of silence through the room. Leora's skin prickled harder. Instinct. The word should have meant nothing. Instead, it made the air between them feel alive. She could feel heat moving in her palms now, faint but unmistakable, as though something inside her body was waking up in response to his presence. Her pulse had gone strange, too fast, too loud. She could hear it in her ears. The king noticed. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then his voice dropped so low that only she and the nearest wolves could hear it. Your hands. She looked down at them before she meant to. For a second, she thought she was imagining it. Then she saw it clearly. A pale silver glow, faint as moonlight through mist, had begun to gather beneath her skin. Her breath left her in a thin, shocked exhale. She jerked her hands inward at once, wrapping one over the other as if she could hide the light from the entire room. The king's stare sharpened. The rival Alpha saw it too. His face changed. "What is that?" No one answered him, because the room was no longer watching him. It was watching her. Leora could feel the change in their scent, the rise of shock and fear, and the sudden ugly interest of predators who had just realized the servant girl in gray was not what she had seemed. She hated the way their attention pressed on her. She hated it almost as much as the fact that she did not know what this light meant. The king moved, not fast, not aggressively. Just one measured step forward, close enough that the heat of him touched her through the cold ballroom air. "Leora," he said. She looked up at him against her own will. The way he said her name did not feel like possession. It felt like recognition, trying not to become worship. His voice stayed low, controlled. "When did this begin?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." That should have angered her. It did. "Should I?" she snapped. "Because no one bothered to tell me I was supposed to glow in the middle of a ceremony." A few wolves gasped at the sharpness of it. The king did not. In fact, something in his expression shifted at the sight of her defiance. Not irritation, not offense, something much more dangerous. Interest. Respect, perhaps? Or the beginning of something that could become far worse. "You did not know," he said. It was not a question. "No." His gaze dropped to her hands again. "And no one told you why you were hidden." A hard knot formed in her stomach. Hidden. The word landed with too much accuracy. She had spent her life being moved from room to room, from kitchen to corridor, from servant post to servant post, always present and never seen. Hidden was exactly right, but she would not give him that satisfaction. "What does it matter to you?" she said. His jaw tightened. More than it should. The answer was so blunt that it stole her next breath. The rival Alpha made a noise of disgust. "This is absurd. She is clearly being manipulated somehow." The king turned his head with glacial slowness. "Leave." "You cannot order me out of my own—" "Leave." The second word was quieter. It was also worse. The rival Alpha's shoulders stiffened. He clearly wanted to fight. He clearly wanted to salvage his pride in front of the court. But the king's voice had the weight of absolute authority behind it, and every wolf in the room knew it. The rival Alpha looked around, probably hoping the council would support him. No one did. The silence of the court was betrayal in its purest form. "At last," he spat. "This is not finished." The king's answer came instantly. "It is if you step one pace closer." The rival Alpha hesitated. For the first time, fear entered his face. "Good," Leora thought fiercely. Let him be afraid. He had tried to claim her like a possession. Let him learn what it meant to be on the wrong side of a king who had decided to make an example out of him. The Alpha looked at her once, not with desire now, but with something colder and uglier. Humiliation, rage. He had been denied in front of witnesses. That kind of wound never stayed small. Then he gave a sharp bow that was more insult than respect and stalked toward the doors. The entire ballroom tracked his movement. When he passed the threshold, the doors closed behind him with a heavy final sound. Only then did the noise begin again. Not loud, not yet, just the brittle crackle of a court trying to recover from the shock of what it had just witnessed. The king did not turn around. He was still looking at Leora. She hated how that made her feel, like she had been pulled into the center of something vast and dangerous without consent. Like the room had changed shape around her, and he was the only fixed point left. "Do you understand what just happened?" he asked. "No," she said at once. "I understand that a man I have never met just threatened war over me, and I understand that you appeared out of nowhere and made it worse." A few nearby wolves looked scandalized. The king, infuriatingly, looked almost amused. Almost. His mouth did not change, but something in his eyes did. "You are angry." "Yes." "Good." That startled her. She stared at him. "Good?" "Yes." "Why would that be good?" "Because if you were not angry, I would worry someone had broken your spine along with your trust." The words landed softly and horribly at once. The room blurred around them for one absurd heartbeat. Then she caught herself. "Are you always this rude?" she asked. His gaze stayed steady on hers. "Only when I am trying not to do something worse." The answer hit her too hard to ignore. She looked at him, really looked, for the first time. The harsh line of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands remained at his sides with obvious restraint, as if every instinct in him was screaming at him to move, and he was holding it down by sheer force of will. He was controlled. Barely. And the more she noticed, the more she realized how much effort that control cost him. That frightened her. Because men like this were never this restrained, unless the thing they were restraining was enormous. The High Elder cleared his throat nervously. "Your Majesty, perhaps this matter should be taken to the council chamber?" "No." The king did not even look at him. The elder shut his mouth. Leora folded her arms over herself, partly because she was cold, partly because she felt suddenly and unfairly naked in front of all these wolves. "What exactly am I supposed to do now?" The king's gaze lowered to her for a moment. Then he answered with brutal simplicity. "You are coming with me." Every muscle in her body tightened. "No." The word came out instantly. A few of the court wolves went very still. A servant saying no to an alpha king in public should have been unthinkable, but she was beyond caring what should or should not be unthinkable. She had already been claimed by one man and stared at by another, like the center of a storm. She had not survived this long by being easy. The king tilted his head. "You disagree?" "Yes." Why? Because she did not trust this. Because she did not trust him. Because every sensible instinct she had told her that being taken anywhere by an alpha who had just declared war was a bad idea. Because she had spent her life learning that all offers from powerful men came with hidden teeth. Instead, she said, "I don't know you." He held her gaze. "No." The answer was immediate. Too immediate. Then he added, "But I know you are not safe here." She almost laughed at that, not because it was funny, because it was true enough to be offensive. "Safe with you instead?" she asked. "No." The honesty of it shocked her into silence. He stepped closer, and every wolf in the room reacted to the movement. Not with fear, with instinct. He did not raise his voice. He did not bare his teeth, yet his presence alone changed the air. His eyes never left hers. "Safe is not a word I can promise you," he said. "Not tonight, not in this palace, not with what is coming." Leora swallowed. There was something almost unbearable about the way he said it. No embellishment, no illusion. He was not trying to seduce her with lies. He was telling her the truth and it was worse than comfort would have been. He reached out one hand, stopped before touching her. Her breath caught. The ballroom seemed to stop with her. His hand remained suspended between them. Then he said, "May I?" The question was so quiet it almost vanished. Almost. Leora stared at him. There was no court language in it, no alpha entitlement, no assumption. Just a request, given as if her answer mattered more than the scene itself. It should not have mattered. It did. She did not answer at once. The king waited. The room waited. At last, she forced herself to ask the only question that made sense. "What are you going to do to me?" His eyes did not waver. "Nothing you do not allow." The answer was so simple that it made her chest ache. That was the problem. Men like him were never simple unless they had already decided where the knives would go. And yet something about the way he stood there, hand still raised, waiting for her to decide, made the air around him feel less like a trap and more like an impossible offer. She did not trust it. She did not trust him. But the rival alpha was gone now, and the room was full of wolves who had just watched her become a political fault line, and the silver glow in her hands was stronger than before. She hated how little choice she had. She hated more that she knew he was telling the truth when he said she was not safe here. Slowly, she raised one hand. Not to take his, just enough to show him she was not afraid to choose her own pace. His eyes fixed on the movement. Then, gently, he closed the distance and wrapped his hand around hers. Heat flared instantly. Not the ordinary heat of skin against skin. This was sharp, sudden, violent enough to make her inhale hard through her teeth. The ballroom dropped away. She saw nothing for one bright, terrifying second, but the flash of gold in his eyes and the dark line of his mouth and the impossible pulls slamming through her bones like a bell being struck inside her chest. Her fingers jerked. His grip tightened for just a heartbeat, then softened. The king's head lowered a fraction. His breath hitched. And when he looked at her again, all the restraint he had been wearing seemed suddenly thinner than paper. He knew. The realization hit her a second later. He knew exactly what she was. His expression did not change enough for the crowd to notice, but she felt the shift in him like thunder under ice. The silver glow under her skin surged once more. The king's thumb brushed carefully over her knuckles. The touch was almost reverent. Then he said, so quietly only she could hear it, "Now I understand why they hid you." Leora's heart kicked hard. Hid me from what? He looked at her for one long, terrible moment. Then his voice dropped to something colder than winter steel. From everyone. And that was when the first scream came from the far side of the ballroom. Not human. Wolf. Wild. Panicked. Every head turned at once. A second scream followed. Then a third. The windows at the eastern wall shook. The king's grip on her hand tightened once, then released. The change in him was instant. No softness remained. No hesitation. Only command. He turned his head toward the noise, eyes flashing gold. "What is that?" Leora asked. His answer was immediate. "War." The scream came again, closer this time, and then the ballroom erupted into motion. One of the palace guards slammed through the side doors in wolf form, black fur bristling, eyes wide with panic. Another came half-shifted, blood streaking one shoulder. The first thing Leora noticed was not the blood. It was the smell. Sharp. Wrong. Rotting under the scent of fur and iron and fear. The king noticed it at the same instant. His whole body went still. Not relaxed, still. Not calm, still. Predator, still. Then he said one word. "Move." Leora had barely taken a breath before his hand came to the back of her elbow, guiding her sharply away from the center of the room. The touch was firm, not rough, protective. The sort of touch that left no room for argument, and yet somehow still did not feel like force. The ballroom exploded. Wolves shouted. Chairs scraped back. Nobles stumbled away from the eastern windows as another roar ripped through the hall from outside the palace walls. The chandeliers above them trembled violently. Somewhere deeper in the keep, something heavy slammed into stone. Leora twisted toward the noise. "What is happening?" The king did not answer at once. He was scanning the room now, reading movement, scent, threat. His jaw was locked so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. The control he had been wearing since he entered the hall had shifted into something harder, deadlier. At last he said, "Someone brought violence to my ceremony." That was not an answer. It was a verdict. Another roar split the air. This one sounded wrong enough to turn her stomach. The king's eyes narrowed. He was already moving, one hand still at her elbow, steering her toward the nearest line of columns. He placed her behind the stone with one sharp motion, then turned back toward the room. "Stay here," he ordered. Leora glared at him instantly. "I'm not staying anywhere while people scream." He looked back at her once. "Then choose something useful." Her mouth tightened. He was gone before she could answer. Not walking, moving. He crossed the ballroom in a blur of black and silver, faster than her eyes could properly follow. The wolves nearest him scattered instinctively. One guard dropped to one knee as he passed, the gesture so fast and automatic it looked less like obedience and more like survival. Leora peered around the column. 2 wolves had already transformed. Another was dragging a noblewoman back from the window. The eastern wall had cracked near the base, moonlight spilling through a jagged break in the stone. Outside, in the courtyard, she saw shapes moving between the torchlight. Too many shapes. Wrong shapes. Not all of them wolves. Her blood turned cold. The king reached the shattered window and looked out. When he spoke, his voice carried across the chamber with terrifying clarity. "Hollow ones." The word fell through the room like a curse. Leora did not know why she knew it was a curse, but she did. The reaction was immediate. Wolves stiffened, some snarled, a few backed up without shame. She could smell the fear now, rising hot and fast through the ballroom. Another howl answered from beyond the walls, then another. Then the sound of something throwing itself against the outer gate hard enough to shake the stone. Leora's fingers curled. The light beneath her skin flared once, bright and sudden. She stared down at her hands. The silver glow was stronger now. Not enough to light the room, but enough to make her palms seem filled with moonfire. She had no idea what it meant, only that it hurt a little to hold it in. The king saw it from across the room. His eyes snapped to her hands. For one hard second, everything else vanished from his face. Then he turned sharply to one of his betas. "Get her out." That was enough for the nearby wolves to start moving. 2 palace guards were on her at once. Leora reacted before she thought. "No!" She twisted away, yanking her arm free. The movement was ugly, desperate, born of every lesson she had ever learned about men deciding what was best for her, while chaos burned around them. She had been invisible long enough. No one got to drag her through a crisis without asking. One of the guards barked, "My lady, I am not your lady." The words came out sharp enough to stop him. The king looked over at her instantly. A hollow one slammed into the outer wall then, and the whole eastern side of the ballroom trembled. Dust drifted down from the ceiling. People screamed again. The king's voice cut across the noise. Leora. She looked at him. He did not look angry. He looked dangerously focused. Do not fight the guards. She threw him a fierce, incredulous glare. Then stop ordering everyone around like I belong to them. Something in his expression shifted at that. For the briefest moment, the corner of his mouth tightened, not in amusement, but in restraint. Then the hollow ones outside hit the wall again, and the moment vanished. I did not say you belonged to them, he said. Then say what you mean. His gaze held hers from across the room, unblinking and severe. What I mean is, you are the center of something far larger than this palace, and if you remain in the open, you will be taken. The words froze her, not because they were dramatic, because they sounded like fact. Before she could answer, the palace doors at the far end burst open. 3 more wolves rushed in, one of them barely keeping his balance. The smell of blood hit the room hard. One guard shouted something she couldn't hear over the growing uproar. Then she saw the shape behind them. Not a wolf. A thing that moved like a wolf. Wrong-limbed. Black and flickering at the edges, as if it could not decide what shape it belonged to. The nearest wolf snarled and lunged, but the creature struck first. The impact sent the wolf crashing into a table, crystal and silver spilling across the floor. The creature's eyes were empty, not wild. Empty. Leora's chest tightened. The king moved in a heartbeat. One moment he was across the room. The next, he was between her and the breach, blade in hand, black leather and gold eyes cutting through the chaos like a nightmare given shape. He did not waste a single motion. He did not shout a battle cry. He simply struck. The blade flashed once. The thing fell apart with a scream that made Leora's skin crawl. The room went silent for one stunned second. Then another creature hit the threshold. Then another. The ballroom erupted into war. Wolves shifted mid-stride, bones cracking and reforming, coats of black and silver blazing through the moonlight. Nobles screamed and fled behind columns. Guards formed a line near the king, weapons drawn, bodies braced. Leora pressed herself against the stone, heart pounding so violently it hurt. This was not a raid. It was an attack, a coordinated one. And the creatures were coming for the ballroom, for the throne room beyond it, for the heart of the palace itself. The king cut through another hollow one with a movement so fast she could barely follow it. Blood sprayed across the marble. He did not flinch. Then one of the creatures turned toward her. Leora froze. Its empty eyes locked onto her. It tilted its head as if sensing something. The silver glow under her skin flared in answer. The thing leapt. Leora reacted on instinct. She threw up her hands. Light burst from her palms. Not soft, not gentle, not the faint silver glimmer she had been hiding. This was a flare of pale moonfire so bright that the nearest guards cried out and shielded their eyes. The hollow one hit the light and screamed. Its body fractured in a spray of black shadow and torn, drifting silver like ash, blowing backward in the wind. Silence crashed down around her. Leora stared at her own hands in horror. The glow faded slowly, but not before every wolf in the ballroom had seen it. Every one. The king was suddenly in front of her. She had not seen him move. He stopped so close that she could feel the heat of him. His head was slightly lowered. His breathing controlled, but only just. There was blood on his blade, blood on his sleeve, and an expression on his face she could not name fast enough. Shock, recognition, possession? No, not possession. Something more intense and far less safe. His eyes locked on her hands, then lifted to her face. "Leora," he said, and this time her name sounded different, tighter, strained. "You should not be able to do that." She swallowed hard. "I don't know what I'm doing." His gaze searched her face for a single brutal second, as if he were measuring whether she was in pain, whether she was lying, whether she was in danger of breaking apart in front of him. Then he made a decision. He turned sharply to his beta, the older wolf with silver streaks in his hair and a face carved by discipline. "Get the council chamber sealed." The beta nodded once and vanished into the chaos. The king looked back at Leora. "Can you walk?" Her chin came up automatically. "Of course I can." Something almost human flickered in his eyes then. "Good," he said. "Walk with me." She bristled at the phrasing, at the assumption, at the fact that he had not asked. Then another scream echoed through the corridor outside, and the palace shook hard enough to send a crack rippling through the marble near their feet. Leora's defiance did not vanish, but it became practical, which was usually how she survived. "Fine," she snapped, "but if you try to drag me anywhere, I'll bite you." A few wolves nearby actually looked startled by that. The king's mouth twitched. Not enough to count as a smile. Almost enough to be worse. "I will remember that." He held out his hand again, not grabbing, offering. The ballroom remained in ruins around them. Bodies were moving. Shadows were screaming at the windows. The scent of blood and fear and moonlight had turned the air sharp enough to cut. And the Alpha King stood in the center of it all, waiting for her to choose. Leora stared at his hand, then at his face, then at the broken room beyond him. She hated every second of this. She hated that he was right. She hated that she was about to trust him more than she wanted to. At last, she placed her hand in his. The instant their skin touched, the silver light in her veins pulsed again, and his fingers tightened around hers with a restraint that looked far too much like pain. He felt it too. She saw it in the brief tightening around his eyes. Then he drew her into motion, leading her straight toward the side corridor that ran behind the throne room. As they moved, she heard him speak under his breath, low enough that only she could catch it. "Whatever they told you, it was not the truth." She looked up at him. "Who?" His jaw worked once. "The people who hid you." The corridor ahead was dark. The war behind them was getting louder. And for the first time since the ceremony began, Leora understood that the worst part of tonight was not the attack. It was the fact that the Alpha King had looked at her in a ballroom full of witnesses and realized she was something the kingdom had tried very hard to bury. And now he intended to dig her out. The corridor swallowed them whole. Dark stone walls pressed close on both sides, lit only by the faint silver glow still flickering under Leora's skin. The sounds of the ballroom faded behind them. Screams, snarls, the crash of marble giving way. But they did not vanish entirely. They echoed down the passage like a promise of pursuit. The king moved fast, not dragging her, guiding her. His hand stayed firm around hers, heat bleeding through his palm into her bones with every step. She hated how right it felt, hated how her body seemed to lean into it without her permission, as if some buried part of her had been waiting for this pull her entire life. She yanked her hand free halfway down the hall. He stopped instantly, did not turn, just waited. Leora glared at his back, chest heaving from more than the pace. "Stop doing that." His head tilted slightly. "Doing what?" "Acting like you own me." The words came out sharper than she meant. He turned then, slow enough that the moonlight caught the hard line of his jaw, the blood-flecked leather at his shoulder, the gold in his eyes that seemed to burn brighter in the shadows. Up close like this, away from the court, he looked less like a king and more like a storm-wearing skin. "I do not own you," he said. The simplicity of it caught her off guard. "Then what was that?" she demanded. "Back there, the mate claim, the war threat. You do not get to decide my life in front of 500 wolves." His gaze stayed level on hers. "I did not decide it," she laughed, short and brittle. "You said the words. You felt them." That stopped her cold, because he was right. She had felt something snap into place the moment their eyes met across the ballroom. Not love, not desire. Something older, deeper. A thread pulling taut between her ribs and his, invisible but unbreakable. It hummed now, low and insistent, making her skin prickle every time he stood too close. She hated it. "I felt nothing," she lied. His nostrils flared once. He could smell the lie. Every wolf could, but he did not call her on it. Instead, he said, "The hollow ones came for you." Her stomach dropped. "What?" "They tracked your scent, your light." His eyes dropped to her hands, where the silver glow pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat under glass. "They sensed what you are." "And what am I?" The question came out angrier than she intended. "A servant who glows? A threat? Tell me, Your Majesty, since you seem to know more about me than I do." He took one step closer. The air thickened. "Leora." Her name in his voice did something dangerous to her pulse. "You are luminary." The word hung between them. She stared at him. "What?" "Luminary." He repeated it slower, as if tasting the weight. "Moonlight made flesh. Last one walked this realm 1,000 years ago. Your power was bound at birth, hidden. But the bond between us..." His jaw tightened visibly. "It is breaking the binding." Her head spun, bound, hidden, luminary. None of it made sense. Her parents had died when she was 3. No one had ever mentioned power. No one had ever treated her like anything but a burden, a mouth to feed, a pair of hands for the endless work of survival. The silver light in her palms felt alien, wrong, like her body had betrayed her in the worst possible moment. "You are lying," she said. "I do not lie." "Then you are wrong." His eyes darkened. "I smelled you the moment I entered the room, felt you. Your wolf answered mine before either of us understood why." "I am not a wolf." The denial came automatic, fierce. He studied her for a long beat. "Not yet." That implication landed worse than a blow. She stepped back, hitting cold stone. "Stay away from me." He did not move closer, but his voice dropped, rough and low. "I cannot. The bond will not let me." She could feel it then, stronger than before. A tug behind her breastbone, pulling her toward him even as fear screamed run. Her hands burned hotter. The corridor seemed to narrow, the world shrinking to the dangerous space between their bodies. Footsteps echoed suddenly from ahead. The king shifted instantly, placing himself between her and the sound. Blade out, body coiled, a figure stumbled into view. Not a hollow one. A woman, round face flushed, servant's apron torn, dark hair wild. She clutched her side, blood seeping between fingers. Leora knew her instantly. "Pippa." The woman's eyes locked on her. "Leora, they are everywhere. The shadows, coming through the walls." The king's voice cut sharp. "Who sent you?" Pippa blinked at him, startled, then dropped to one knee despite the pain. "Your Majesty, I came for her." Leora pushed past him. "Are you hurt?" Pippa waved her off weakly. "Not bad, but the kitchens, the hollow ones got in. I saw your light from the hall. Knew you needed warning. Warning about what? Pippa's face paled further. Lady Hela. She was there, smiling, before the first one hit the walls. The name twisted something ugly in Leora's gut. Lady Hela. Her aunt, guardian since her parents' death. The woman who had starved her, worked her, beaten defiance out of her year after year. Always watching, always calculating, never kind. She did this? Leora whispered. Pippa nodded. Heard her laugh. Said something about the light ripening at last. The king went predator still again. Hela! His voice was ice over steel. House Vance! Leora's head snapped to him. You know her? She petitioned counsel for your hand 3 times. I refused. His eyes met hers, gold and unrelenting. Now I know why. Pippa coughed wetly. She wants the power. Said it would be hers when the moon rose full. The glow in Leora's hands surged, hotter, brighter. Pain lanced through her palms. She gasped, clenching her fists. The king was there in an instant, gripping her wrists without asking. Breathe through it. His touch grounded her. The heat eased. But his hands stayed on her, thumbs brushing her pulse points, as if anchoring her to the world. Pippa watched them both, eyes wide. The bond! It is true! Leora yanked free again. Nothing is true! The king let her go, did not argue. Just said, we move, now! Pippa struggled up. Where? King's Tower! The words carried absolute finality. Leora glared. I am not going to your rooms. Not a request. She bristled. Make it one. His gaze clashed with hers. Head to head, unblinking. The bond thrummed between them, electric, insistent. For one endless second, neither yielded. Then distant howls echoed closer. The palace shuddered. The king broke first. Please. The word cost him. She saw it in the tightening of his mouth, the flicker of something raw in his eyes. Please come with me. Leora swallowed. Pippa touched her arm. He is right. It is not safe. Nothing felt safe, but the hollow ones were closing in. Hela's betrayal burned fresh, and the man in front of her had killed to protect her without hesitation. Fine, she said at last. But Pippa comes too. He nodded once. Done. They moved as a unit then, the king in the lead, Leora and Pippa close behind. The servant corridor twisted upward, hidden passages built for escape now their only path. Torchlight flickered. Stone grew colder. The bond pulled at Leora with every step, her body aching to close the distance to him. She fought it, fought the heat in her blood, the glow in her veins, the impossible rightness of his presence. Ahead, the king paused at a heavy iron door, raised his fist, knocked twice. Sharp. Bolts slid back inside. The door swung open. An older wolf stood there, silver-streaked hair, weathered face, kind eyes in a killer's frame. Beta. Brennan, she thought his name was. First to the king. He knelt at once before Leora. My lady. She stiffened. Do not. He rose without argument. As you wish. The king ushered them inside. King's Tower. Private. Elevated. Silver damask drapes framed floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking moonlit gardens. A massive bed dominated one corner, furs piled high. Fire crackled in a black marble hearth. Moonflowers bloomed in crystal vases, their glow matching the light under her skin. Safe, for now. The king bolted the door himself, turned to Pippa. Healer? Brennan nodded. Coming. Pippa sank onto a fur rug, exhausted. Go, I will wait. Leora knelt beside her. You saved me tonight. Pippa gripped her hand. Always. Brennan guided Pippa gently toward a side chamber. Then it was just them. The king and Leora. Alone. The bond roared to life. Her skin burned where he looked at her. He felt it too. Saw it in the flex of his hands, the dark hunger in his gold eyes. Leora. Her name again, weapon of intimacy. She backed up a step. Do not. I must. He advanced, slow, controlled, every movement deliberate. She hit the wall, no more room. His body stopped inches from hers. Heat radiated off him like a bonfire. Snow and smoke and dark pine filled her lungs. His head lowered, nostrils flaring, scenting her. The bond sang, pulling, insisting, demanding. I can feel you, he said, voice rough as gravel. Every breath, every heartbeat. She trembled. Stop. I cannot. One hand braced the wall beside her head. The other hovered near her jaw, not touching. May I? That question again. She should say no. Every instinct screamed it, but her body arched toward him, whispered yes. Yes. His fingers touched her face. Lightning. Heat raced through her veins, silver light exploding under her skin. She gasped. His growl vibrated through her chest, low and possessive. His forehead pressed to hers. Two halves crashing together. The claiming mark burned into existence at her throat. Pain. Pleasure. Transcendence. He shuddered. Mine. The word sealed it. Mate bond complete. And outside the tower windows, the hollow ones howled their arrival. War had found them. The mark burned like a brand from the inside out. Leora's hand flew to her throat, fingers pressing against the junction of neck and shoulder where heat seared deepest. Not just heat, something alive, pulsing, connecting her directly to him in a way that made her knees buckle. The king caught her, arms like iron bands around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. His growl rumbled through her bones, low and primal, wolf answering wolf, even though she had never shifted. Never would have believed she could. You are safe, he said against her hair. She wanted to shove him away, needed to, but her body melted into him instead, silver light spilling from her palms to bathe them both in moonfire glow. The bond thrummed now, full and complete, souls crashing together like waves finally allowed to break on shore. Safe. The word should have sounded hollow. It didn't. Outside, hollow ones slammed against the tower stone. Claws scraped. Shadows writhed beyond the silver damask drapes. The palace shuddered again, deeper this time, as if the foundation itself rejected the corruption trying to take root. He pulled back just enough to look at her. Gold eyes blazing, pupils blown wide. Leora? Her name again, rough, reverent, like saying it anchored him. She touched the mark tremblingly. What did you do to me? His thumb brushed her jaw. What we were made to do. The door shuddered under heavy blows. Brennan burst back in, blade dripping black ichor. They're through the lower levels. Healer's on her way. The king nodded once, never breaking eye contact with Leora. Hold the stairs. Brennan knelt briefly before her again. My lady? Stop that. He rose with a faint smile. As you wish. Then gone, alone again. The bond sang louder. Her power surged in answer, silver light brightening the chamber until moonflowers glowed like stars. Pain lanced through her again, sharper, as if the binding that had held her dormant for 23 years now tore free entirely. She gasped. He cupped her face. Breathe. Let it come. I can't. You can. His voice command and caress at once. Voice of the Alpha King resonating through pack bond, through mate bond, through her very blood. She obeyed without thinking, breath steadying, power steadying. Then it hit. Full awakening. Silver light erupted from her core, blasting outward in a wave that shook the tower windows. Moonflowers burst into full bloom. The iron door glowed white-hot, sealing itself against the assault outside. Night turned to blinding day across the palace grounds. Leora screamed. Too much. Too bright. Her body no longer hers. Moonlight made flesh and ready to consume her from within. The king snarled, crushing her against him. His wolf answered. Black fur rippled across his arms, then receded. Half-shift, monstrous, magnificent. He pressed forehead to hers, teeth grazing her new mark, not biting, anchoring. I have you. The bond flooded, his strength poured into her. His control, his certainty. Two halves made whole, souls merging in silver and gold. The light stabilized, settled into steady glow beneath her skin. Her eyes opened. Silver now, not brown. She could hear heartbeats, smell emotions, feel moonlight like a physical caress on her face. The king pulled back, stared. A tremor ran through him. Beautiful, his bond whispered. She felt it, his awe, his possession, his terror that he might not be enough. I am enough, she said. His eyes flashed. You read me. Through the bond. He nodded once. Rough. Good. The sealed door rattled violently. Lady Hela's voice slithered through stone. Little light. Such pretty power. Let me taste it. Leora's lip curled. Never. Hela laughed, sharp as breaking glass. You cannot hide forever. The Hollow Ones hunger, and I control their hunger. The king's hand flexed on his blade. Brennan. His beta appeared like shadow. Councils assembling below. Northern packs mobilizing? War. One word. Final. Leora's glow flared. She killed my parents! Truth slammed into place through fragmented memory. Hela's smile the night they died. The accident. 15 years of starvation and control, waiting for power to ripen. The king's rage flooded the bond. She will answer. Hela's voice again. Dear niece, come out. Let Auntie see what you've become. Leora stepped forward, light gathered in her palms. You will see nothing but dissolution. Silence. Then Hela's voice dropped, ancient and wrong. Such fire, just like your mother. The name struck like claws. Leora stumbled. The king caught her instantly. She lies. But doubt flickered. Pippa staggered back in then, supported by the royal healer. Silver hair coiled high, deep blue robes, weathered face kind despite sharp angles. Thessaly. She took one look at Leora and hushed with wonder. The luminary, awakened. Pippa gripped Leora's arm. Don't listen. Hela trapped your mother's soul, used it to bind you. 15 years, waiting. Thessaly nodded. I knew your mother. She begged me to hide you if... She knew. Lightning struck Leora's chest, soul harvester. Guardian turned monster. The king growled. Brennan, the vault. His beta vanished. Thessaly knelt before Leora. Your power needs anchor. The claiming helped, but full control requires love. Leora finished. The healer blinked. Yes. The king's gaze met hers. Heat, need, restraint fraying at edges. Outside, Hela screamed. True scream now, not laughter. Hollow ones fracturing against Leora's light. Brennan returned, carrying a crystal vial. Soul vault. One remains. The king took it. Gold light swirled inside. Your mother, he said. Leora's hands shook as she accepted it. Warm, alive. Her mother's essence trapped by Hela's ritual. Free it. She poured light into the vial. Silver met gold. Soul released in burst of radiance. Warmth flooded Leora. Love, pride, forgiveness. Hela shrieked from beyond the door. No! Shadows coiled under stone cracks. Living darkness. Hela's true form. The king half-shifted fully now. Warhorse-sized wolf ready beneath skin. Stay behind me. Leora stepped forward instead. Together. Their hands met. Bond complete. Light doubled. Hela burst through. Living shadow, eyes black pits, teeth sharp and wrong. Mine! Leora's light hit first. Silver fire consumed shadow corruption. Hela screamed, form fracturing. But she lunged, claws for Leora's throat. The king intercepted. Claws raked his chest. Blood sprayed, he snarled. War cry shook marble walls. Leora poured everything into him. Healing light, not golden common blood, pure luminary silver. Wounds knit instantly. Power surged through Bond. Hela staggered. Impossible! Your time ends, Leora said. Not anger, certainty. She touched Hela's fractured form. Mercy, not destruction. Her mother's voice whispered through Bond. Forgive. Hela's shadow dissolved. Transformed, not killed. Silver flower blooming where corruption fell. Silence. The king pulled Leora close, bloodied but whole. It is done. Outside, hollow ones dissolved into freed spirits. Relief and anguish mingling in final release. Dawn crept through windows. Rose and gold light. Council pounded on sealed door below. Majesty, the pacts demand explanation. The king ignored them, looked only at her. I look at you, he said, voice raw, and see everything I have ever wanted. Leora's silver eyes met his gold. Completed bond hummed between them. I stopped being hidden, she said. I started being yours, not because I had to, because I wanted to. He kissed her then, slow, devastating, souls fully merged. Brennan cleared throat suspiciously from doorway. Pippa grinned through tears. Thessaly hushed wonder again. A wolf howled at rising moon. Family found. War won before truly begun. Council challenges waited below. Northern Pack would pay. But here, in King's Tower, two halves made whole. Everything changed.